I was running down the sidewalk on Highway 92 in Jefferson City, Tennessee. This is a pretty major traffic thoroughfare. It's a 4-lane highway, center turn lane. Speed limit is between 45 and 55 miles per hour. Additionally, there is no shoulder on this highway. The right lane butts up right against the sidewalk. I was running up a pretty steep hill with our dog at the time, Georgia. She was on her leash on my left between me and the highway. I had my earbuds in. I was just chugging along when all of a sudden an 18-wheeler truck came flying by us in the right lane. Obviously, this spooked Georgia, and she skidded over in front of me, and I hit her, got tangled in the leash, and fell hard, hitting my shoulder on the pavement and banging my chin against the sidewalk, scraping it up, lying by the side of the road, bruised and bloodied. Ironically, I collapsed right in front of a pregnancy consultation center known as the Life Outreach Center. But no one from the Life Outreach Center opened the door and reached out to try to help me in my life. Luckily, though, I wasn't, nothing was broken, nothing was strained, so I brushed myself off and continued my run home, just dripping a few drops of blood on the sidewalk every few feet between there and my house. When Paul writes to the Galatians at this point in the letter, he pictures this congregation as a bruised and bloodied runner lying on the side of the road. You see, when he left this congregation, this was a church that Paul planted. He formed them as a Christian community. They had been running well, the run of faith. They were running with confidence. But since he left, someone has cut them off, and they've tripped up and fallen. The ones who caused this fall, we call them the agitators. These are other Christian teachers. They've come to Galatia after Paul has left, and they've told the Christians there that Paul's got some stuff wrong. Yes, Jesus died and rose again to free us from sin and to bring us into fellowship with God. Yes, you Gentiles, that's people who aren't Jewish by history or ethnicity, you're part of that fellowship as well. But while Paul teaches that that is an absolutely free gift that belongs, teachers say, actually, there are still a few things you need to do to prove that you belong to Christ. There's still some Sabbath practices that you need to keep. And the men in the church need to be circumcised. Now, when Paul hears this, he is incensed, depressed, devastated. It's like these agitators got spooked by an 18-wheeler truck. They just couldn't believe that God's love would be that free, that extravagant. And so they've cut over in front of the Galatians, who were just jogging along with their earbuds in, going about the life of faith, tripped them up, they've collapsed to the pavement, and they've grown convinced they've got to follow the teachings of these new teachers who've come among them. And so why is Paul so upset with this? Well, Paul knows from his previous days as a very devout Pharisee that the act of circumcision marks primarily who someone belongs to. And to be marked by circumcision is to say that you belong to Torah or the law. And Paul knows that the law has been corrupted. It's been made into an endless list of restrictions and requirements and responsibilities that no one is possibly capable of perfectly keeping, or the ones who claim they follow all the laws perfectly do it only to puff themselves up and make everybody else look bad. It's this endless cycle of expectation, achievement, and failure. The resurrection of Jesus, then, frees us from those requirements, those expectations, those rules that can be used to define who's worthy and who is unworthy. God's grace comes freely as a gift, and the only way you reject that grace is by trying to make a new list of expectations of what everybody's got to do now. Embrace your freedom. Enjoy your forgiveness. You, brothers and sisters, Paul says, were called to be free. Now, I don't know too many folks who are concerned with keeping the Torah unless they are part of the Jewish faith. But the law, as an entity of expectations imposed on us, is still a pretty powerful force around us. We encounter it every day. You better make a good grade on this test so you've got the right GPA to get into the good college. You want to make the varsity squad? You need to get out there and do your drills every afternoon. You want to have a family? Well, you need to get married by 30. That biological clock is ticking. You know, you need to be saving 10% of your income for retirement. Have you thought about refinancing your house? Interest rates are so low right now. You know, you really need to get your cholesterol under control. Have you thought about taking your kids abroad? Kids benefit so much from seeing the world. You know, if you're not using your social media platform to push for justice, then you're just part of the problem. We've got to reduce our use of plastics. They're destroying the planet. Can you feel the pressure mounting from all the expectations? Have you already, just over the course of this morning at church, begun to work on that mental list, or maybe if you're at home, you're doing it physically because I can't see you, of the things that you need to get done? Oh, yeah, we've got to take care of this. Oh, I've got to do that. Oh, this person needs this from me. Yeah. The law. It's all around us. Now, I want to be clear. I don't think there's anything wrong with studying for tests or trying to make the varsity squad. I think that home ownership and childbearing are important, and you don't want people to live in abject poverty in retirement. But when we let these things be imposed expectations upon us, as some kind of marker that I've got to meet these goals in order to fit into the group that I desire to belong to, then we're tripping ourselves up. We're falling on our faces. We're scraping our chin on the pavement over and over again. Now, there's a pretty prominent voice in the milieu of our culture that speaks into this scenario of feeling overburdened and having all these expectations laid upon us. And it's that assurance to give yourself a break. You know, sometimes you just got to let the house be messy. Sometimes bedtime gets pushed back. Give yourself a mental health day. Just eat the ice cream. Don't try to give in. Don't give in to that pressure anymore to be the perfect kid, parent, spouse, worker, citizen, activist. Or as Tom Haverford and Donna Meagle refer to it in the NBC sitcom Parks and Rec, give yourself a treat yourself day. You hear it? The way out of all of these burdens and obligations is a day of material indulgence free of obligation and expectation. That's one voice around us. It's quite loud. Yet the Christian freedom that we know is not simply freedom from responsibility, permission to catch our breath and give ourselves a break. Because if you've tried to live in that place of self-focused freedom, it ends up becoming its own form of the law. Now you're asking yourself, am I taking the right kind of care of myself? Am I practicing the best self-care? Am I censoring myself so that I fit in with other people? Am I being true to myself? Did I get the most out of that treat yourself day? You see, everything that we can evaluate can become a law. even our self-focused freedom can become something we judge and can produce within us anxiety about whether or not we're free enough. And so Christian freedom gives us something that selfish freedom cannot give. It frees us from the law, the expectations, and the myths of our own responsibility, but it gives our hearts and hands a direction to live for. Paul tells us, do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. He goes so far as to say, you want to talk about a law? Let's talk about a law. One commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. That's what all those other rules are about. Anyway, one thing, love your neighbor. So be free from the law, circumcision, and all those imposed burdens and expectations that tell us we've got to measure up, and be free of your own self-focused freedom that constantly seeks greater peace and personal contentment, because that's just another myth that leaves us empty too. Instead, be freed to love other people. Now, that's not a new expectation. You better get out there, love one another. Now, this is an overflow of receiving the grace of God that comes to us with no strings attached. It reorients our entire perspective on the people we meet. As Charlie Kauser says in his commentary on the passage, if I in love really become a servant to my neighbor, then I am delivered from the temptation of paternalism, of constantly being the wiser, richer partner who always knows what is best for my needy friend. I am at my neighbor's disposal in serving him. And in serving him, discover afresh the freedom God has given us both. He does something for me by providing me the occasion to look beyond my own problems, to be rid of my selfish preoccupations, and to find a liberating relationship. So why excel in school? Because with the knowledge that you gain there, you could develop something, a technology or even just a way of being in the world that serves other people. Why make the varsity squad? So that you can be a good teammate, an encourager, be someone that the others can rely on. Why try to eat healthy and exercise? So that your body is ready to serve, to love, to give to those around you as you're able. It's an invitation to a freedom where we are no longer the focus of our own life. It's a subtle difference in motivation, but it's the difference between law and gospel, between death and life. Lee Stein is an author. She wrote a novel called Self-Help, and she was featured last month as a columnist. She wrote a piece for the New York Times, and she called the piece "The Empty Religions of Instagram." She doesn't use our language, but in her own words, talks about the law, the burdens and expectations put upon her, and also that voice that says, be free of all of that and pursue your own personal goals all the time. Towards the end of the column, she laments that neither of those paths, either living up to someone else's expectations or pursuing her own personal goals, has really been any help to her. Here's what she says. I've hardly prayed to God since I was a teenager, but the pandemic has cracked open inside me a profound yearning for reverence, humility, and awe. I have an overdraft on my outrage account. I want moral authority from someone who isn't shilling a memoir or calling out her enemies on social media for clout. Secular millennials may follow politics devoutly, but the ones we've chosen as our moral leaders aren't challenging us to ask the fundamental questions that leaders of faith have been wrestling with for thousands of years. Why are we here? Why do we suffer? What should we believe in beyond the limits of our puny selfhood? My mom is an influencer in the old school sense, Stein writes. At 72, she still works full-time as a psychotherapist. She's a lay minister in her church, and she fills her free time with volunteer work. Her sermons are a combination of therapeutic tips, references to current events, and lessons from Scripture about having compassion for the other, even during times of intense polarization. I told her that I find myself craving role models my age who are not only righteous crusaders, but also humble and merciful, and that I'm not finding them where I live, online. Referring to the influencers who have filled the void religious faith has left for people like me, she said, they might inspire you to live your best life, but not make the best use of your life. Whether she knew it or not, Jill Stein's mother was echoing the words of the Apostle Paul to the Galatians through the ages. Be free from sin, be free from the law, be free for your neighbor, for others. Give yourself away for their sake, for ultimately, in that act, you find the freedom that Jesus gives. Serve one another humbly in love. In the end, that's all our lives are worth.